There's something sinister on your street. It's a bad neighbor. But what if you've become what you've been trying to avoid? Bad neighbors.
Good morning. Good to see you guys again. And if I sound a little bit odd, I've got a little bit of a throat thing going on right now, and so maybe I just seems like I'm getting choked up, but I'm actually just getting choked, and so that's what is happening. A little chest cold, but we will push through today. But I am excited to get to carry us through week 3 of this series we've been in this month called Bad Neighbors. We've been talking about why does Jesus seem so interested in his followers loving their neighbor as themselves? Why is that such a big deal to him? And are we good neighbors? Because I think it's really easy to be a bad neighbor and not even realize you've become one. And so we've been sort of peeling apart what it looks like to be a good neighbor, what it looks like to be a bad neighbor, and if we find ourselves on the wrong end of that equation, how to move more in the direction that Jesus is calling us towards. And so that's what we've been doing these last few weeks, and we're going to continue down that path today. And I want to encourage you just to take some notes today. Write down some things that stand out to you, that jump out at you, that you just want to have a conversation about later. I think sermons are things that ought to jumpstart conversations that go somewhere when you leave and inspire you to think more about your existence. And so hopefully there's something here today that'll help you do that. And if you are taking notes, the title of my message today is Sock Money and Scary Movies. Sock Money and Scary Movies. I love movies. How many of you just movie fanatics? You love watching movies. It's amazing, and it's incredible now because you can watch any movie in the world in your underwear on your couch, right? And then you have to get questions from your kids like, Dad, why are you sitting on our couch in the living room in your underwear? And you're like, I own this couch and this living room. I could do what I want to, okay? But I think the most fun person for me to watch movies with is my wife, Gretchen, because she's hilarious to watch movies with because she gets all the way sucked in, okay? I think right after the credits, she forgets she's watching a movie. She fully enters into the experience. She is a director's dream because everything that they were hoping that a person would feel or think, she never sees any of the twists coming. She never guesses what's going to happen. And she talks to the screen and the characters. I remind her they cannot hear you. This is a pre-recording, and it's also made up. This is fake. What is happening right now? And she's like, "Oh my gosh, no, don't! That can't be his son." You know what I mean? And she's yelling, and she's getting so caught up, and she's sweaty, and it's just like sometimes I stop watching the movie. I just start watching her because she's just so entertaining. And it's even more exciting because, as it's happening, and even afterwards, she starts, she envisions that whatever was happening to the characters is probably going to happen to her. And that sort of lasts for a half hour, 45 minutes after whatever show or movie we're watching. And she likes to watch a lot of break-in and murder movies, which is interesting too. And so right afterwards, she gets that panic. You know, I don't know if you've ever been there before where you watch a scary movie. We're not really into horror movies, but like thrillers or suspenseful movies. And then afterwards, you're just a little bit creeped out. And this is my wife to the next degree. And because she's so afraid of everything right afterwards, that's when I like to send her out into the kitchen alone to get me something. Because it's just fun to watch what happens. And she's real tentative and she's sneaking out there. And then that's usually right when I like to scare her because it's fun for me. At least that's what I used to do until she threatened divorce a couple times. And I was like, you know what, let's back off. I got a little too intense. But she would just envision that it was going to happen. And probably for a whole half hour afterwards, she's just on high alert. And maybe you've been there too before where it's right after you watch a certain movie, it's every crack of a branch outside of your window, you're like, what? It's a chainsaw murderer. They're coming for me. And you're like, I don't think there have been a lot of reported cases of that recently. And you're like, it's going to happen. It is going to take place. And movies can have this really strange and powerful effect on us. And I think this is because, the stories that we consume, in whatever form we consume them, they shape the lives that we live, right? They set sort of expectations for what we are going to experience in our life. And you've probably been there too, where you watched a documentary or clicked a link or heard a podcast or you binged a series, and it temporarily convinced you in the short time afterwards that you were every serial killer's type, right? They were looking for you. Everyone you know is definitely hiding something now. You can't trust anybody. And everything that tastes good is probably poison. I think that's what most documentaries are about now. And most of the time, right, as time goes on, the panic wears off. But, other times, that temporarily heightened awareness becomes this permanent part of us. It changes the way that we see the whole world moving forward. And it's like this cautionary tale that we witnessed imprints on us, even if it has very little to do with us. I had a friend in college who, anytime you would ask him to chip in for something, he was always very happy to do it, but he'd be like, yeah, absolutely, man. I just got to find a place where I can pop my shoes off. And I'd always be like, what's going on now? And he's just like, yeah, that's where I keep my money, right? I keep it in my sock, bottom of foot. And I'm thinking, so the most disgusting part of the foot area. And he would pop, like in a restaurant, he would pop his shoe off, dig into his sock, and fish out the money. I'm like, why are you doing these? Like, everybody knows that you don't keep any cash higher than a $5 bill anywhere that could easily be frisked, okay? And I'm like, where is this coming from? And he's like, because of mugging, okay? My mom sent me an article, And I'm like, the one she sent you like a month ago about, pimps in Spanish Harlem from 1974? We live in Missouri, okay? You work at a Burger King, right? No one is trying to come after you. Do you even know anyone who knows anyone who's heard a story about somebody being mugged? You don't. You are not in danger. And he's like, are you going to take this money or not? And I'm like, no, I do not want your sweaty foot fungus $20 bill. That's how pandemics get started. Okay? And I'm pretty sure this guy started COVID-19. And nowadays, like, this sort of stuff happens all the time, right? We scroll past, we're sent countless stories about new things and people to be afraid of constantly. And the thing that's interesting about this is we are story-driven creatures. And so a scary story told well enough has a powerful impact on us. It can convince you that unsettling exceptions are undeniable rules. In other words, that something that happens somewhere else once is happening right here regularly, right? You hear one example of something and you're just like, that's probably happening everywhere. I've got to change my whole life based on it. I've got to be weary now. And things can quickly get out of control. You end up living on high alert. And I think if you find yourself in sort of this panicked, paranoid, overcautious state, you think like that's all it is. I'm just being cautious. I'm just being wise. But I wonder, like, are we just being wise, or is this just what we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel better about the fear that is calling the shots inside of our stories? Because as I understand it, wisdom is different than fear. In fact, wisdom is about pursuing the best path. But fear is about avoiding the worst possibility. And sometimes these things can lead to a similar outcome, but it's about orientation. It's about what's making the decision for you. It's about what's driving you. And I just wonder, if you think about your life, do you make more decisions based on who you want to be or what it is you're trying to avoid? Because I think more and more of us are getting to a place where our lives are not driven by a vision and the values of who we feel like Jesus is calling us to be. We are driven by the fear of turning into or getting exposed to or having to experience or living in a world where fill in the blank happens. And I just wonder, like, what decisions fear has made for you that they've gone unchecked for so long in your life that you just assume that they're fact. You know, like my friend, you're walking around in rural Missouri just being like, you got to be on your lookout at any point in time. Somebody's going to steal this sock money. You got to stay on high alert. I think about how many hours he wasted with this routine and how many people got, hoof and mouth disease from this guy's weird habit, him trying to pass off money that had athlete's foot. I don't know. You just think like, man, I wonder when it comes to your life, are there things that you've bought into that you haven't fact-checked in so long because you've assumed that maybe this exception is the rule in your life and you've got to do everything you can to guard yourself against it. I wonder what opportunities, relationships, your fear has cost you. And I think sometimes we tell ourselves like, hey, better safe than sorry. I don't know that that's the best mantra to live by, though. I wonder if this is the slogan that should be steering our story. And this week, as we spend our third week in a row in the same exact story, in this parable of the Good Samaritan, I think this story has a lot to say about this idea of better safe than sorry. And I want to just unpack what Jesus seems to think about this idea. We're going to read this again. Some of you may have it bookmarked or memorized already. It's Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 30. And it says this: a Jewish man was traveling and attacked by bandits. They stripped him, beat him, and left him for dead. A priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side and he passed him by. And later, a temple assistant walked over and looked at him, but also passed by on the other side. So there's 3 people total that pass by. The first 2 don't stop. Why? And I think at a very base level, it's because of the story they're telling themselves about what will probably happen if they do stop. I mean, put yourself in these people's sandals, okay? You have seen, I'm just guessing as to their chosen footwear, right? You've seen enough Law and Order episodes to put your head where these people are at, right? This is if you pull this up on a map, you'll see that this location where this is happening between these 2 cities, man, it is it's in this valley and there's all this high terrain around it. There's a lot of places to hide. It's really dark. It's a dangerous area. It's a dark road in the middle of nowhere. And if I were one of these 2 people who was walking up on this brutal scene, I think some of the things I would be thinking are man, it looks like this guy got jumped. Okay, and so if I go over there, am I going to get jumped? What's going to happen to me? What if the people that beat up this guy are just they heard me coming and then they hid? And then if I get a little too close, they're going to jump out and beat me up too. That makes me nervous. And why did they attack him? Okay, I don't know this guy. All right, maybe he had it coming. Okay, maybe he's a bad guy. I don't want to help a bad guy, right? I don't want the papers later to be just this idiot nursed the worst criminal back to health and now he's back on the streets. Thanks, dum-dum. I don't want to be that person. And then what if he's a shady person and then people start assuming that because I helped him that I agree with him or support everything he's into. And what if he's into some stuff that I don't want to be associated with? And when you start sort of asking these kinds of questions and you put yourself in the place of these people, passing on by almost sounds like the logical choice, the wise option. Except the story, it doesn't end there. This third person comes along. It says in verse 33, then a despised Samaritan came along. And, just that adjective right there alone would have had Jesus' audience reacting just like Gretchen watching a movie. Just despise. This guy ain't going to stop. Watch. They would have been thinking do you know what despise means? This is how this person is described. To despise someone is to strongly dislike or feel disgusted by someone because you think they're bad, wrong, gross, or not valuable. And Jesus is saying it is common knowledge that this Samaritan would have been despised because he's a Samaritan. That's all you really need to know about him. And there's a backstory here that the audience Jesus is talking to would have known that we aren't necessarily privy to, the Jews and the Samaritans, they despised each other. And it had been going on for a long time. They actually all began as part of the same family, but things went sour. And, when you read the Old Testament, which is a Jewish text, pretty much all the stories that talk about Samaritans frame them in a really bad light. One of the first stories about a Samaritan in the Old Testament is that of a brutal rape, and the rapist is a Samaritan. There's another story about this evil judge who, anytime somebody doesn't agree with one of his rulings, he just goes out and kills them the next day. And that guy is a Samaritan, just in case you're not catching on to what's happening here. And this is the stereotype that people, like a common Jew would have carried around during this time in history about what a Samaritan was. A Samaritan, you mean godless rapists and murderers? That's how they were seen. Then there was this time, like back way before Jesus' time, where the Jews were they were attacked, and there was this big military battle, and the Samaritans were sort of neighboring them, and they could have helped, and they asked them to help, but they didn't. They refused to help them, and the Jews never forgave them for that. They held a grudge pretty much forever, and there were countless stories, even after that, because the feud between these two people, of Jews passing through Samaria and being jumped and attacked and beaten to death. And then, of course, there were stories of Jews getting their revenge. And it was just this constant back and forth between these two people groups. There was tons of hurt and baggage on both sides. And I imagine the Samaritan in Jesus' story as he walked up on the scene and saw this Jewish man beaten on the side of the road. I imagine him thinking, like, listen, if this guy would have found me like this, there's no way he would have helped me, so why should I help him? And you know what? That's a really logical thought. But Jesus calls his followers beyond logic to mercy. And to be merciful in the fullest sense of that word is oftentimes to defy what is logical. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, Jesus famously says, "Do to others what you'd like them to do to you." And my boys like to misquote this to me when they were younger. They would punch. One would punch one, and then they would punch them back. And be like, "Why'd you do that?" And he's like, because do unto others what you want them to do to you. And he punched me, and so that means he wants me to punch him. So I just gave him what he wanted. And I was like, wow, you're going to have a bright future on Facebook because you are great at twisting scripture. You're doing great. But that's not what's happening here. Another way to say this would be this: do unto others the good they will not do unto you. That's what Jesus is actually saying here. And isn't that what the Good Samaritan in the story is doing here? He's doing the good to this man that he knows this man would never do for him. And this is what I wonder. Who do you despise? I mean, if you're being honest, maybe it was somebody who hurt you or lied to you or let you down. Maybe it's not like a one specific person, but like a category of people. It's like the people that disagree with you, or who make life difficult for you, or who disrespect your beliefs, or who work against you, or who seem to celebrate when things don't go your way. And imagine that one of those people was hurting on the side of the road. Would you stop and sacrifice for them? And most of us, if we're honest, we're like, no, of course not. But no one would. I mean, let's be real. I mean, somebody who has mistreated you that bad, or who represents a category of people who fight against everything you care about. No, I mean, in fact, this is a parable, right? So it's a made up story. This story is just like, oh, that's amazing. It's inspiring because Jesus made it up, which is the only way that someone would actually do something like this. This doesn't really happen in the real world, except that sometimes it does. I remember a while back reading this story about Keisha Thomas. She's an 18-year-old black teenager who went to peacefully protest a KKK rally. And as she was standing there holding a sign and singing, things got kind of crazy and out of hand. And there was this man with a swastika tattoo and wearing a Confederate flag shirt. He got shoved to the ground and he started getting stomped on by the people. And Keisha pushed her way to where he was and threw herself on top of him, using her own body to shield him from the beatings. A man who despised her. And I look at this picture and I just think like, this is the Samaritan story. Like, Keisha did for him what he would not have done for her. And to great cost to herself. She had bruises and cuts all over her body from absorbing some of the blows meant for him. And in this moment, she was being motivated more by who she wanted to be than what she wanted to avoid. And that's hard to do. When you look at a picture like this, when you hear the Samaritan story, what you are witnessing is mercy to a nonsensical degree. It is an act that transcends humanity. There's something that is divine about it. But you know what? You're probably not going to stumble onto situations like this often. I hope not. If you do, where are you living, right? Let's get you to a different apartment. And probably, you know, what else is true is that like most of your neighbors aren't people that you despise. I think for a lot of us, most of our neighbors aren't people we despise. They're just people that we're dismissive of or we're disinterested in. We're like, I don't have a vendetta against these people. I just don't have anything in common with them, okay? And I just like, my life is full. I just don't have a desire to like really build a relationship with them. But why is it that we think this? Why is it that we somehow know that we would not connect with or have a great relationship with people that we really don't even know? We just know a few things about. And I think the reason is because we assume mistakenly that the one thing we know about them tells us everything we need to know about them. We make a snap judgment based on a few surface details. We're like, well, you know what? I mean, I love that we're doing this series about getting to know your neighbors, but that's just not going to happen for me because my neighbors, like, they're so much older, okay? These people are old. I'm talking at least 50. Oh, my gosh. Oh, 1 foot in the grave. Remember when you used to think that when you were 14? You're like, so you live to 50 and you die, you know? And now that I'm like, in my mid-40s, I'm like, 50 is the new 19. Let's do this. And then my knees are like, no, it's not. Also, it's going to rain later. I'm like, thanks, buddy. You know, man, the other people like Catty Corner, like they just brought a new Tesla. So I'll tell you this, they're probably pretty stuck up. I mean, like, you just got to assume. You know, there's this other couple, and I've seen them because they like, you know, with the car seats, they've got 2 little kids, and so they've got their hands full. They probably don't want to be invited to hang out because they just got too much going on, right? These other people down the block, they put up way too many decorations for Halloween, okay? And so obviously they are animal sacrificing Satanists. Okay, that's the only assumption we can make, which is like, wait, is that what happened to the cat? Now I'm getting real scared. And like when we think these things, like, you know, we think like, well, you know, okay, yeah, maybe some of it's, but maybe it's true, maybe not. But listen, better safe than sorry. And, you know, you want to be a kind person, but you don't know these people. And if you put yourself out there, there's really no telling what is going to happen. That's nerve-wracking. Getting involved with people you don't know is unpredictable. And you've heard some stories. I mean, you have lived some stories that can demonstrate maybe how sideways things can go. And you've tried to do the right thing before in your own life, and you have got hurt, and it didn't always pan out. And you want to be the sort of person like the Good Samaritan who slows down and stops and cares for people, but fear so often tells you just to pass on by, even the people you live nearby. These little opportunities to say hi or have like a real conversation or linger at the mailbox or invite them over, offer to help them with something. Like even when the idea pops up in your mind, it just brings on this tidal wave of internal conflict. You're like, what if I reach out and they just are like, they don't want people to reach out. And I just like, now I'm on their hit list because I bothered them. What if they just don't like me? What if they really like me and I don't like them? That may be worse. I don't know. What if they're crazy? What if they give me pot? Okay? Or like cuss in front of my kids, you know? Or worse, try and sell me essential oils. Or what if they like try and show me like their illegal dogfighting ring? Like then I'm gonna have to do something about it. It's gonna be weird, but I'm also gonna kind of want to participate. And it's like, I don't want to be put in that situation. What if I invite them over and they steal stuff from my house, you know? And it's like, I don't want, you know, or hit on my daughter or my wife or me, you know? And your wife's like, no one's gonna hit on you. And you're like, okay, that's hurtful. It just feels risky, you know, is what I'm saying. And I got to, you know, listen, I got to protect what's mine. And I wonder if you have noticed how preoccupied so many of us are with protection. Almost to a paranoid extent. We got to protect ourselves and our children and our families and our identities and our jobs and our borders and our country and our way of life. And that's sure, yes. But here's the question I have. Should safety really be first? I mean, I know it feels like, man, you can't even, of course it's important. But I mean, like from a Jesus New Testament perspective, it's definitely important, but is there anything that Jesus in his teachings consistently elevates above personal safety? And I think the Good Samaritan, like a lot of good parables, doesn't just quickly give us the answers. It encourages us to wrestle with these questions that are complicated. Verse 33, it goes on to say, when the Samaritan saw the beaten man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, he soothed his wounds and bandaged them. He put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn. And the next day he paid the innkeeper, saying, take care of this man. If his bill runs higher, I'll pay for it next time. And so the Samaritan does all of this for someone he knows despises him. That's amazing. But what's even more amazing to me is I don't think he does this because he's not afraid. I don't think he does this because he's no longer nervous or because that he believes that like what he's doing is not dangerous. I think he does it because he's decided in his heart, this man's needs are more important than my fear. And that's amazing to me. And I wonder, like, how do you get there? Like, how do you train yourself to think like that? And I'll tell you this, the more you see yourself in someone, the easier it is to serve them. The more you see yourself in someone, the easier it is to serve them. But that's going to require you to set aside whatever layers of differences exist between you, and you're going to have to dig a little deeper into their story. You know, like, for instance, like I don't know what it's like to be a Muslim single mother. And so on the surface, it could just be like, we have nothing in common. I could size somebody up. I could decide we have nothing to talk about. But I do know what it's like to want to be a good parent. I know what it's like to worry about money. I know what it's like to have moments where you are surrounded by people that you feel like don't get you. I know what it's like to be in a situation where I'm in over my head, that I never thought I would be in a situation and feel like I don't have the right support. I know what it's like to feel like you're moving through life and you're so stressed out, but there's no one you can talk to. And when you get to this place, that's your entry point. I really believe if you drill down deep enough into their story, you'll eventually get a glimpse of your own story. Because the truth is, the more we interact with those who are different from us, the more we realize they're not that different from us. You ever sit down and you're just talking to someone and you're learning about their backstory and you're like, wait a minute, we're the same. And you couldn't be more different, but also you're both people that God made, that God loves, struggling to figure out their own lives. You know, some ancient rabbis used to teach that love your neighbor as yourself is actually better translated, love your neighbor who is yourself. Maybe that sounds like a little new agey to you, but like Jesus did seem to agree with them. He once told this parable about a group of people who refused to inconvenience themselves for people that they had kind of judged around them. And when Jesus ends the story, he condemns those people by saying this. This is in Matthew chapter 25, verse 45. When you refuse to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me. And man, I got to tell you, Jesus' early followers, they wholeheartedly bought into this idea. And they went out of their way to serve anyone and everyone around them, especially people that were nothing like them. Listen to the goals that the Apostle Paul wrote to the early church. This is what he asked them to prioritize. This is Romans chapter 12, verse 9. He says, don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Hate what is wrong. Hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. Now, there's so much here, but I guess I would say, you know, if there is a question according to the New Testament that is more important than how can I protect myself, it's how can I best honor them. And I got to tell you, if what you feel like you need to do to protect yourself dehumanizes them, that feeling is not from God. Because Jesus never invites us to dehumanize other people. In the Good Samaritan story, those who put their own safety first are the bad guys. And the man who risked his safety for someone else is the hero. And what is interesting is, Jesus never, anywhere in Scripture, never asked his followers to do anything he didn't already do. And you know what happened when Jesus fully committed himself to love his neighbors? They crucified him. Are you starting to understand why not everyone wanted to be a Jesus follower back in the New Testament? People are like, if Jesus was so nice and kind, why did people try and kill him? Because he invited them to be nice and kind too. And that felt like a little bit dangerous. And someone who is saying like, man, we shouldn't dehumanize other people. And some of what you were doing to grab hold of safety and security and power for yourself is demeaning to others. That doesn't sit well with everyone. And Jesus commands his followers to love like him. And I just got to tell you, if you are looking to be a Jesus follower, he's asking for you to lay down your life for people around you like he did for you. In other words, love is not safe. And I think we keep trying to look for a loophole in this. This is probably the question that you're asking yourself, how do I guarantee that, if I put myself out there and I serve somebody, that they won't take advantage of me? How do I guarantee that? And you know the real answer? You can't. Not completely. I mean, you can make wise decisions, but at some point, if you continue to care for others sacrificially, someone will take advantage of you. What Jesus did for humanity was not safe. What the Good Samaritan did for the beaten man on the side of the road was not safe. What Keisha Thomas did for the white supremacist was not safe. But Jesus never promised that following him would be safe, only that it would be fulfilling. And I got to say, if you are bored with your relationship with Jesus, it's definitely because you are not following him closely enough. Because Jesus leads us toward a risk-filled adventure fueled by love. And when the unbelieving people around you notice this about you, trust me, they're going to want to know more. because real love is awe-inspiring. And so, yes, assess the situation around you. Do your research, count the cost, calculate the risk. But sometimes even after that, do what God is asking you to do and inconvenience yourself to love them anyway. I wonder what would happen to our communities if we took this seriously. In fact, that's what I want to challenge you to do this week. Here's your homework for this week: to take a God-centered, nerve-wracking risk to get to know a neighbor better, to put yourself out there. In fact, all the better if it causes you to challenge an assumption that you've made about them. If it challenges you to risk maybe being rejected, or risk being embarrassed, or risk them not liking you, or risk an awkward conversation. The risk is worth it in the mind of God. It's what you're here for. And when you follow Jesus in this way, life comes alive. And this is what I want to pray over you today. That as you take this step, that your life would be more fulfilling, that you would stop living in fear, and that God would demonstrate his love for others through you. Would you bow your heads across this room? God, we are so grateful for the love that you have for us, for how you care for us. God, I pray that as we take baby steps towards trying to see and notice, pay attention to, lean into, care about the stories of those whose lives you've placed us in, because you've planted us in a house nearby, because you have given us a desk nearby, because you have placed our kids on their soccer team, or one of our grandparents in an apartment next to them. God, I pray that we would be people who are open to elevating, loving others the way you would, over protecting ourselves. And God, I pray that we are willing to take God-centered risks to care for and love and serve those around us, to extremes that move beyond logic to mercy. God, may you use the mercy that we show to others, because we have been given it first and foremost from you, to transform the hearts and lives of the people around us. God, may we be more like the Good Samaritan than those who simply count the cost, feel afraid, and walk by. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.